So welcome to this short recorded webinar on a subject which I find very interesting, particularly during these pandemic times, and it's just getting the balance between longer term planning versus execution. And for those of you who are into acronyms, mid to long term planning, integrated business planning, and execution. In Oliver White jargon, we call it integrated tactical planning. But again, it's about you plan for things to happen long term, and then you execute them, and then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and lately perhaps it hasn't worked as well as one would have expected. So if you join me today, I guess you have an interest in the subject, and I hope by the end of this recording, your interest might have been satisfied, and you can always come back with questions. And there's also a chat box which you can use in case you want to ask direct questions, not during the recording though. So I'm Flavio, I'm a partner with Oliver White. It's not about marketing, just so you know, Oliver White's been in the business of educating and coaching businesses to success, focusing in particular on what today people generally call end-to-end supply chain or end-to-end value chain, and broadcasting to you from Barcelona today, Spain. So let's get cracking. Just the usual health warnings. You will be sharing these materials. Don't need to read through all that, but so we spend a lot of times, a lot of IP that goes into what you're going to see in this necessarily brief presentation, and we would just like you to treat it with respect. So most businesses today will be familiar with either integrated business planning. Some companies, many companies do call it sales and operations planning. Others call it sales, inventory and operations planning. Old days, it would have been known as MRP2. They French speakers, they will probably associate it with PIC, Plan Industriel et Commercial. So many different acronyms for many years, but basically it's about how you run a business. So if you just look at this wheel, well, who would not have some activity in terms of planning new products and services, and hopefully also taking out the old ones from the marketplace? Who would not expect to have what's a business called a commercial forecast? Understanding what we want to sell, and are those volumes and the revenues something that we like, that we can go with? Who would not have some sort of supply or operations that ensures those product and goods just reach our clients as we plan? And who would not, at the end of the month, just do the numbers and say, are we making money? Are we not making money? So I would say integrated business planning, it's structured common sense, it is, but there are some characteristics which even today, some companies are not completely abiding by. For example, horizon. You need to have a longer than annual plan or budget horizon, because you're anticipating events, you're not reacting to events. Today, when I started business with consulting 20 years ago, we would say probably rolling 16 to 18 would be best practice. These days, it's usually more than 24. And if you're, for example, in pharmaceutical businesses or in into aerospace or high tech, it could be 36 or 48 months. So that horizon is essential. If you don't have that longer term planning, then you don't actually have an integrated planning business. Second point is that you need to look at the future once a month in aggregate terms. It's a high level view. It cannot be detailed because, if you're managing thousands of items or references or SKUs, whatever you want to call them, well, you don't have time to discuss all that. And also you don't have, or you shouldn't have, you shouldn't be paying too much attention to the next 3 to 4 months, because although we all say consumers and markets challenge us, They want, the short-term changes in attitudes and consumption patterns, but actually your supply chains or value chains, they take much longer to react. So the first 3 to 4 months, it's practically all done, and it's down to executing plans. Realism is another very important concept about integrated business planning. There's no point in telling us lies. There's no point in being overly optimistic or pessimistic, and therefore relies on demonstrated performance. So we measure our ability to hit the plans, and based on that ability to hit the plans today, then we can make more confident choices for the future. You look in 24, 36 months out, every month. Obviously, you're not looking at minutiae. You're not looking for the missing euros or pounds or dollars. You're thinking big, and you're just sizing the essence of what changes have happened during the month, and those changes need to be treated. And the last point, I would say, also very fundamental, it's not just a supply chain process, it's a leadership process. It's a CLT process, it's a C-suite process. And those companies that don't realize that, they kind of diminish the potential and the benefits from that this process can bring to your business. So I guess so far so good. Many companies come to us and say, yeah, Flavio, we've been to Oliver White and we've been to other competitors of yours in consultancy, and we've all got the process right, but it doesn't work. And we say, well, have you thought about behaviors? Have you thought about people and not just processes or IT systems? And sometimes, hard reality comes about. For example, we know what the trend of the business is. It's not going the right way, but we haven't got the inclination to share it with leadership, and we try perhaps to hide the news. And when it hits us, it's too late. And in some businesses, it's just not acceptable to be bearer of bad news. Whereas when we talk about integrated business planning, we say, bad news fast. Tell me brutally as soon as you can, and perhaps we can find a way to fix it. If you don't tell him, then I'll be hit by the bad news, and we're all in trouble. Another point which I find often is the old game about, well, I asked for 120, so I get 110. Because if I ask for 100, then I will get 90. And everyone, it gets very confused in the business because you have multiple plans. But some people say, yeah, it's always worked like that. It will surprise you how many businesses, I might be in front of also with commercial audience, how many businesses actually put commercial targets beyond and above the budget. So if you do that, well what are we actually aiming for? Making the right decisions at the right time. Find this very often too. People always have they're very sensitive about employing people, and adding headcount is always a very suffered subject. But if the process tells you, and your demonstrated performance tells you, and your experts tell you need more people, well, why should you not have them? And again, people struggle to make some decisions, even in the face of the hard facts. Another point which I find is that despite the process, the formality, the monthly meetings, the some people just invite them for a coffee and they just listen to, informal chat. And the problem is, which is then the right chat? Are we talking about the formal one or the informal one? I think people need to let go of the coffee machine and just stay within the process. And we've seen that particularly since March 2020, companies in trouble. And by the way, both types of trouble, selling too much or selling too little. Now, we've had, and from my perspective, I think I've met more companies being met with much greater demand than they could satisfy than the opposite. In those times of need, some companies say, we're going to go back to command and control. It always works. Military style stuff, you just do what you're told. And then the problem is, well, why have you spent so much money? Why have you told people through the process that calls for teamwork, democracy in making decisions, participation, if all you're doing is, at the end of the day, it's just saying, okay, it's just a nicer way to tell you people what I think you should be doing. So message is, you got the process, but have you got also the behaviors that go with it? And then there's this interesting point, because ever since we started developing S&OP at the time, integrated business planning now, we would always, come up with this chart that said basically, look, you've got to, you got to admit you've got short-term variability here in the next few months. When we actually project your business out, it tends to be a rather flatter line. What matters is the trend. And then on top of the trend, just think about the variability around the most likely outcome. Have you got any potential good news, which might happen, but you haven't got them in the bag yet? Or perhaps have you got some potential vulnerabilities? So bad news, which again, if untreated, might hit you. And obviously, common sense will tell you that that range would increase, right, as we move from today out to the full planning horizon. Some companies call it the swim lane. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Swim lane means you're a swimmer, I'm a swimmer. I sometimes train for triathlon, not very successfully, I must say, these days. But when I swim in a pool, I can't actually swim dead straight within my 2 lines of float. I do a bit of zigzag, but I am within the swim lane. So long as I stay within the swim lane and I don't jump and invade into some other swimmer space, I'm okay. Now, of course, the tighter the swim lane, the better it is, the more efficient you are, the quicker you get to the result. But this swim lane concept is very well known, and it has worked very well within the realms of integrated business planning. Enter the pandemic. So what happens now? Well, something like this happened. Things got wild. And so the point was, for many businesses, why do we really want to try and ask ourselves about what this long term would look like if we can't even manage the next few days? And I have to say that was a very good challenge that we were faced with. And so basically we went back to one of the tenets of, call it longer term planning, which is actually thinking about the assumptions that underpin your plans and your numbers. You all use assumptions, to my belief, because when you do, and most of you, I guess, will still do that, you do what's called a strategic plan once a year. And if you don't do that, you do budget, you do business plan, and it's just based on assumptions. It's what you know so far, plus what you think will happen for the future. So it's not something that is unknown to you. But I think it's acquired a new sense, and not just in the later pandemic years, because I'll quote here some examples. These are what we call Flavio's case studies, because they're not printed material you could visit. It's pretty difficult always to have companies accept to write case studies. They're so heavily vetted. In the end, it's a nice story, but you don't get much out of it. But this is personal experiences for, as I said, more than 20 years in consultancy by now. And I'll just pick up a few, probably 2 of these, and delighted to discuss with you the rest if you find the time and interest. I would pick up the 2007 case study. I hope some of you still remember what happened in 2007-8, the credit crunch. Banks cut all loans. There were no funds. I was then already living in Spain, and for the past 2 years, Spain, and this is fact, it had used more concrete and had more cranes installed than the rest of Europe. Now you can imagine the amount of frenetic building that took place in Spain in those years. After the crunch, there were, this unofficial information, but between 5 to 7 million unsold properties, flats and buildings, 7 million, which still haven't been sold, and most of them have actually been torn down. Cheaper to just get rid of them than to try and revamp and refloat them. But this was 2007. It was September 2007. I remember because I was with a client. I was attending a demand review, so where we actually look at their commercial forecasts. But that was 2 years out, so we were looking at 2008 and 9. And this is a paint business. And the demand was zero. It just literally went to zero. All the distributors, all the wholesalers, because the industry just, the building industry just brutally stopped, then everyone stopped buying. It was just a zero, just a flat line. And you know, I said, well, we couldn't believe that. But eventually, you know, no orders, zero demand. What did the business do? The business actually closed down most of its factories. They took out most of its capacity. That was it. Okay, IBP, hard facts, face the truth, do it. But then we met again January, February, and strange things have started happening. There was a huge pickup in consumption of high quality paint, non-drip paint for interiors. And we just, you know, I was, you know, with the demand planner, just analyzing the facts, and we thought, why couldn't we think 3 months ago that people on the dole would perhaps spend some money on redecorating their houses? And of course, they couldn't call in professional painters, too expensive. And when you do it yourself, you buy good quality products because you don't want to make a mess. And that's what actually happened. And that company was completely caught unawares. They had huge stockouts. They were out of stock in that particular type of market for about 2 years. Could assumption have been made? Could somebody have thought about the consequences of that? And now I'll take you to the last example in this list. A drinks business, alcoholic beverage business. And we had met in 2020, and we ran for a while a demand planning project. And we met back again in 2021, just after Christmas. The famous Christmas where everyone thought that COVID would be gone, but actually very well and very much stayed. And we're just actually analyzing 2020, and we said, what has happened in 2020 in your business, in your drinks business, that could have been anticipated? And we just, okay, post-rationalizing a bit perhaps, and you know, post-rationalization is an exact science, they say, but we're actually just thinking it through. And we said, well, back in 2020, back in March 2020, people stopped going out because they couldn't. They weren't eating out, they weren't drinking out, they weren't traveling. They didn't lose their jobs, unlike 2007, because they were kept in their jobs, because there were, you know, lots of money pumped into the economy just to keep the economy running. So people had money but couldn't spend it. So wouldn't they treat them? Wouldn't they, wouldn't they drink at home? In fact, it turns out they were drinking more because you didn't have to drive anywhere. Would they mix cocktails? Nah, probably not. You know, nah, that's not the right experience. But they would buy mixers. Yeah, they would. They would buy mixers. And would they not go up market with the quality of drinks? After all, much cheaper to drink at home in the bar and restaurant. They said, yeah, absolutely. That would go for the top premium brands. And that's exactly what happened. So it's funny again how we could anticipate that in 2020, just talking over coffee, but not actually building those assumptions into our plans. And that company had huge stockouts because, again, the consumer just wiped out their finished product goods. So I bet most of you, or many of you, will have very much state-of-the-art IT systems and programs. You can manage big data. Some of you might even have machine learning, artificial intelligence, but don't underestimate and don't forget the fact that there is still some common sense in the way we plan the business. I call it, instead of fast, fast and slow food, and I say fast business planning and slow business planning. There is still that opportunity for using your experience, your intelligence, and try and hit those assumptions which perhaps other companies might not be very keen or very clever at, checking out, we could actually make a huge difference to your business. So, having said all that, short-term availability has been, and we believe will be, call it an opportunity for those businesses who will be able to exploit it. But when businesses talk to us and they say, Flavia, we can understand the market, consumption is crazy. I mean, consumer shifts their appetites and their loyalty so quickly, which we just lost. And I said, hold on a second. Can you really just blame this to your consumers? Let me just ask you a few questions. How well are you planning data accurate? Believe you me, many companies say, oof, they're just about right. So, well, what do you mean just about right? Do you work in teams or do you have functional targets? I have operating targets, I have financial targets, and they don't talk to each other. So inevitably we have multiple plans, even in execution. How good are our execution processes? Yeah, we have processes, and they're very well laid out. And we talk about quality processes, health and safety, financial, compliance, But what about good old supply execution processes? Do we trust each other? Do we have each other's backs in execution? Not often. How do we treat our KPIs? Do we really use KPIs to understand where the business is going, and do we learn from them? And I would say the killer question, how much of your time do you spend every day firefighting, and do you like that? Because believe me, some companies actually like it very much. And you don't realize, because firefighting is very, it just gives you it gives you a high, you fix problems, and you go home, you're happy, and next day you're back to firefighting. I think companies should run like a clock to say, guys, 60% of our time we're just fixing problems. We're not actually thinking about the way our future will be managed. We're just fixing, and to an extent, today's issues. So in many cases, when you look at the vagaries of consumption, just think about yourself, because you've probably got things you should be blaming yourself for in execution. So in terms of execution, remember, I guess this is perhaps somewhat complex slide, but remember there are lots and lots of activities which were defined, mapped, and formalized many, many years ago, particularly all of those that sit here within what we call the supply planning leg. All this stuff exists for about 60 years, and some of it was actually invented by our founder, Oliver White. So, being ignorant of the fact these processes exist, and today even more in an enhanced state through advanced IT systems, well, that's not an excuse. So you need to know these processes. You need to be aware and conversant with your different planning horizon. You got strategic planning, then you got integrated business planning, and then you got integrated tactical planning activities. So you go from yearly thinking, once a year we meet, to monthly thinking, and then you go to daily execution. And you need to get the right synergies, you need to get the right connectivities, because if everyone ends up in the boiler room here, stoking coal in the fire to make sure the Titanic sails as fast as possible into a, I hope not, iceberg, it's not going to work, right? So you need to keep your focus right. Leadership needs to be in the captain's deck. They need to get a sense of direction. And below, people need to make the machines, the boilers run, the engine properly maintained and lubricated. But you cannot confuse one activity with the other. They all end up into successful sailing, not the same people, not the same processes. And again, through the pandemic, we have seen there's been a compression. Everybody's been driven with respect to the boiler room. Now we need to decompress this, and we need to get back to what it means to run a successful ship. And finally, when it comes to KPIs, and just an example, on time in full, probably one of the measures that are most widely published. You need to understand not just the number there, but where the number comes from. You need to do your drill down, you need to go into root cause, and you probably need to go deep into 2 to 3 levels to understand exactly what is happening to your business. So KPIs are there to help you improve running a successful business, and not just there to feel, monthly meetings with leadership with nice scorecards full of greens or reds. That's not the purpose. You need to learn how to use and, let me say, love and have a passion for performance. So to summarize, getting this balance between longer term thinking, vision, anticipation, and short-term execution is never going to be an easy one. I think we've all felt the pain since 2020, but if we could go back with examples many, many years ago, and we could still see these pain points, where we've always been torn between what's the balance, how many fires do I have to keep putting out to stay alive, or how many fires do I need to anticipate before they hit me? It's never going to be easy, and it's probably going to be ever as easy as it would have been in the past. But you need to have a roadmap. You need to set your priorities right. You need to get the right balance between your processes, your tools, your systems, your data, and your people. And you just have to manage the balance as best as you can. And let me add, with a lot of common sense, which still remains very much a very useful asset to your businesses. So this is it for me. As I said, there must be somewhere a chat box where you can ask us questions. I hope this would have been useful. We'll certainly be delighted to talk to you again, because this is not just business, it's just, it's the way we live in this post-pandemic world. So good luck to you all, and I wish you a very successful business in the future.